Hi, today in this video I'm going to explain my concept of musical translation, which is an original idea I first came up with more than 30 years ago. I'm going to show you how to translate a simple chord sequence into any type of harmony you want. The concept of musical translation is something I first thought about way back in 1978-79 when I was a postgraduate student at Sheffield University. It's fair to say I was almost obsessed by the idea at the time. It all began with a simple question. Take a theme built upon a sequence of major and minor chords. Is it possible to translate this, to change it into a different harmony, a different sound world, a different musical language even, and yet still retain its identity and remain true to the underlying logic of the original progression? What if we began with this chord, for example? What would the next chord be? Well, we can certainly do one thing easily enough. We're all familiar with the minor variation of a major theme. Most musicians can produce a translation of this type, and we're all struck by the strange change in mood that accompanies it. But since the mid-19th century, music has evolved. Composers have employed an ever-widening range of chords within their pieces, each with their own distinctive mood. Debussy and Ravel were great innovators in this area. Is it possible to go beyond the minor and translate our theme into these harmonic worlds? And is it an intuitive skill, or might there be a logical technique behind it? I was keen to explore this when I was younger. After all, modern classical music seemed to have lost its way. The complex sounds favoured by 20th century classical composers such as Schoenberg seemed to bear no relation to the simple and beautiful popular music I grew up with. And no one had established a connection between the two styles. The majority of the audience had been lost. They were unable to empathise with this new music, the new sounds, and had no way to relate this new complexity to the music that they loved. In those days it was an either-or situation, and faced with the choice between vibrant tonal music and the avant-garde, especially of the 50s and 60s, the audience were only ever going to vote one way. I wanted to address this problem, not by ignoring complexity, nor by returning to old styles or simplifying everything. I wanted to combine simple and complex ideas in one piece and unify them on a structural level. I wanted to be able to write simple themes and develop them into complex ideas. This used to be the real achievement of classical music. Bach and Beethoven were masters at this, but we hadn't found a way of doing it with the new harmonies developed since their era. I looked around to see if other composers were thinking about this. Messiaen, for example, had used a modal system that allowed both simple and complex harmonies. But he certainly never used anything approaching a conventional chord sequence or popular song within his style. It would only be fair to mention two other composers, both of whom I met and talked to at the time. The first was Henri Pousseur, a Belgian composer who tried to integrate tonal harmony into serial technique. He wrote a piece called Couleurs Croisées, based on the anthem We Shall Overcome, and an essay called The Apotheosis of Rameau, explaining his ideas. I met him and interviewed him in 1979 after his Roundhouse concert. I think he was probably the one who got me looking for some kind of systematic approach to this. But while his ideas were interesting, to me the sound of his music was still rooted in serialism. The second was Frédéric Rzewski, who wrote a marvellous set of variations called El Pueblo Unido, based on this theme. But this was mostly a free approach, based upon his wide experience as a pianist and improviser. For me, the question still remained: how do you connect simple and complex harmonies? It's well known that the major scale in Western music derives from one basic major chord and two transpositions of it. C, F, G gives us the notes of the scale of C major. Back in earlier classical music, these would be referred to as chords of 1, 4, 5, and a scale of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The 8 is where we get the term octave from. It's a practical and useful system and it makes sense, but it kind of blinds us to what's really going on. You'll remember that serial composers went beyond this by using a similar method of simple counting, this time with the semitone scale. But the way they used it negated the old tonal system, causing a rift between the two styles. And counting semitones isn't going to get you very far in properly understanding tonal harmonies. 0, C, 1, 2, 3, 4, E, 5, 6, 7, G. 0, 4, 7. Doesn't give us any information about why that chord should be so important. One needs to ignore traditional terminology to see that the pitches in a basic major chord are derived from the frequency ratios 4, 5, 6, and that these frequency ratios come from the Harmonic Series 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just for a second, let's move on to an A major chord, because the piano is tuned to A equals 440 cycles per second, and it makes the numbers easier to follow. Here's the harmonic series from a low A on the piano. Here's our major chord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A, C sharp, E. In this table, our first harmonic is 110. You can see harmonics 4, 5, 6, 440, 550, 660. 4, 5, 6 times 110. Some of the other harmonics don't quite correspond with the piano's tuning, but let's leave that for the moment. Right, let's move back to C major. It's the same principle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So 1, 3, 5 are the first distinct pitches to occur in this series, and these already give us our C major triad. Octaves, misleading term, are just doublings of those frequencies. 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16. So to make things simple, we could ignore the doublings from now on and just refer to the primary harmonic for any given pitch. So G in C major is 3 wherever it occurs on the keyboard, and E in C major is 5 wherever it occurs on the keyboard. So a C major triad is 1, 3, 5 wherever it occurs. Notice it's not a melodic 1, 3, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but a harmonic 1, 3, 5. Now the strongest and simplest of these harmonic relations is 1 to 3, because it is the first to occur outside of doubling, and this governs the nearest transpositions of the chord. 1 to 3 down gives us F, 1 to 3 up gives us G. It's also easy to understand from the harmonic series how one can change the complexity and type of chord by filtering the harmonics present. There's our full harmonic series. These chords choose selectively from that series. They filter the harmonics present. Suppose we filter the harmonic content to get this chord, 1, 5, 7. If we want to get a new scale from it, we should use the two simplest transpositions of it, like we did with our C major chord. We could move it by 1 to 3, as before. But perhaps that would not be consistent with the harmonic nature of our starting chord, because we don't have 1 to 3 in that. So instead, let's transpose it by the ratio 1 to 5, because 1 to 5 is the strongest interval in our filtered chord. 1 to 5 down, and 1 to 5 up. So now we have this chord, and this chord. Now we have translated the major scale into something else. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Actually, the whole tone scale. This is significant. When we do this, we are appreciating that harmonic character does not just work in a vertical, simultaneous way, but it also influences in a horizontal way through time. Just a couple of other things to appreciate before we get going. The major chord comes from the first 3 distinct pitches in the harmonic series, 1, 3, 5. But we also need minor chords. Where does the minor chord come from? Well, I've seen it written that they're harmonics 6, 7, 9. But whilst that's true, you can certainly find it there on the piano. The tuning of the 7th harmonic casts doubt on that. It's also true to say that it's harmonics 10, 12 and 15. But those numbers don't reveal much to us. They don't say why a minor chord is so important. I think it's much more accurate to say that the minor chord comes from the inverse harmonic series. We take the harmonic series and invert it. And the first three distinct pitches from that give us a minor chord. There's a nice symmetry. The one is an inversion of the other. Seems pretty obvious, but it came as a bit of a surprise to me way back in 1980, because I had been wondering about the second chord in this. Starting here, I'd been using intuition and the idea of common tones, but it felt a bit haphazard. I mean, it's nice, but it's intuitive on that second chord. I wasn't certain what I was supposed to be looking for. Then I found it. This is my diary entry from 1980. I called it the SubHarmonic Series then, which I believe was Stockhausen's term. But I first heard it from my composition tutor at Royal Holloway College, Brian Dennis, who had studied with Stockhausen in Cologne. It's odd that it took me a while to make this connection because Brian used both the harmonic series and the subharmonic series in his music. Not with any idea of harmonic translation, but to project a timeless sense of natural beauty to accompany the Chinese poems he was setting. The second point to make is that generating rational frequencies requires specialist tuning. In 1985 this was not easy, so I had to convert these ideas into what was available, the 12 equal-tempered notes of the piano. In fact, this means that instead of multiplying and dividing, we add and subtract to get our new chords. Fortunately, we don't need to worry about the maths. Music gives us a shorthand for these frequency relationships, which makes everything simpler to talk about for musicians. We talk of intervals. The ratio 1 to 3 is the interval of a perfect fifth. Remember, we're ignoring doubling or octaves. The ratio of 1 to 5 is a major third, and so on. Now we can use those terms. So why did I even bother to mention ratios? Well, I think it's really important to understand the relationship between those two terms, frequency ratio and musical interval. But it's especially important to understand the origin of these things, the harmonic and inverse harmonic series, and how that has determined our musical evolution. Once we start using intervals freely, we are setting up a very complex network of harmonic relationships. So despite the way things appear on the piano, in most music, these notes are not all harmonically equal. They are actually part of this intricate and infinite network of harmonics, formed by the compound application of the harmonic and inverse harmonic series, which is then quantized into equal temperament. Now we're in business. With our new understanding of major and minor chords, we can define the harmonic structure underpinning any piece of tonal music, both vertically and horizontally. You can think of this definition as the harmonic formula for that piece of music. We can then choose different harmonics for our basic chord. In effect, we're filtering the existing harmonies. And by applying these new values to the formula, we will get a translation. I call it, variously, frequency translation, pitch translation, or harmonic filtering. They're all the same idea. Now, to see how this can work, let's look at my piece Translations from the Original, which was composed in 1985-86. Here's my original theme. I tried to choose something quite traditional sounding, that was simple, clear and triadic. These are some of the first chords we learn. It uses only 5 separate chords, and these make up the 8 chords in the sequence. F, E minor, C, A minor, F again, E minor again, D minor, C again. How can we define these 8 chords harmonically? Here's my way of thinking about it. My theme is in C major, so the main chord is C major. That's C, then a perfect fifth, and a major third from C. For this we are only looking at the intervals from the keynote. The strongest interval in this chord is the perfect fifth from C. The second strongest interval is the major third from C. For my theme we also need the relative minor, A minor. To get that we go up by the second strongest interval, a major third, and then invert. That gives us A minor. We know that progression. Why not use the strongest interval, C to G? We can, for sure, but doing that and then inverting gets us C minor, and my theme doesn't use that key. So now we have these 2 chords, major and relative minor, and we have these 2 intervals inherent within them. Strongest, perfect fifth, second strongest, major third. And that's all we need to find the 8 chords used in the theme. Here's the process, or what might be called the formula. First chord F. Major chord, go down the strongest interval for F major. Second chord E minor. Relative minor, go up the strongest interval for E minor. Third chord C, that's our main chord, just stay on C. Fourth chord A minor, that's our relative minor, just stay on A minor. Fifth chord F, same as before. Sixth chord E minor, same as before. Seventh chord D minor. Relative minor, go down the strongest interval for D minor. Eighth chord C, just stay on C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have now defined our theme. We have a formula that identifies 2 main intervals in the basic chord, a perfect fifth and a major third, and explains how those intervals are used to generate the 2 types of chord in the theme, major and minor. And the formula also explains how those chords generate the whole chord progression. Now, I said, let these 2 intervals equal X and Y. Now our theme is a formula with X and Y, and we can choose different values for X and Y, and we will get a different chord progression, a translation of the original. But it still has the same syntax. It's like saying the same sentence in a different language. Here's a really important point though. It's our craft as musicians and our sense of taste that allows us to turn these simple blocks of harmony into something aesthetically pleasing. We have to use our musical intelligence. So that's why, instead of this, I went for this. I found it pleasing to use this voicing of the chords, to use occasional passing notes, and to have a rising and falling melody with a little melodic turn at the end. Joseph Haydn defined the need for taste and craft really well when he described why he thought Mozart was the greatest composer he knew. He has taste, and what is more, the greatest skill in composition. Doesn't matter how clever or knowledgeable you are, you still need taste and skill in applying it. We'll need taste and skill when we start trying to voice the translations that arise from strange and unfamiliar harmonies. What harmonies should we choose? Well, I went for 4-note chords. They have a richness that I like, and I already knew from popular music, jazz and classical music that some would work very nicely. We can use 4-note chords because in our 3-note chord theme, the 4th note can just be thought of as doubling one of the other 3 notes. In fact, using this idea, you can expand and contract the density of harmony however you want. How many distinct 4-note chords are there on the piano? Accepting that what musicians previously called inversions and transpositions are still the same chord type. Well, some of you will already know where to find that answer, but back in 1985 I didn't even know the answer existed, and there was no internet. I had to work it out for myself, and actually I'm no mathematician. I worked it out painstakingly by trial and error and arrived at the number 43. I was never totally confident in that result. Trying to work out why it was that number, I kind of solved it using factorials. But it was only 2 years ago via a search on the internet that I learned of Alan Forte's pitch class set lists in the back of his 1973 book, The Structure of Atonal Music. The title gives away the reason why I hadn't heard of it, as I didn't care for exclusively atonal music, and the internet didn't exist. Anyway, it's 43. So let's use 4-note chords and make 43 translations of our theme. My first translation uses a basic chord of C, E, G sharp, B. I like this chord. I'd already used it before in my music. Jazzers would probably call it a C major 7, sharp 5. I tend to think of it as E major over C, the flattened 6th. It could be written like this, which would kind of make sense, as it's an inversion of this. But maybe we shouldn't mess with existing terminology. We now find our translation using the same sequence of operations that we followed with the theme. C to E, which gives us our strongest interval, a major 3rd. C to G sharp, this gives us our second strongest interval, a minor 6th. And B, being the 4th note, just goes along for the ride. We need the relative minor, what was A minor. To get that, we go up by the second strongest interval, a minor 6th, and then invert. That gives us this chord. So now we can find the rest of the chord sequence from these two chords, major, minor. For our first chord, we take our new major chord and go down by the strongest interval. For our second chord, take our new relative minor and go up by the strongest interval. we have this, then this. For our third chord, just stay on our new major chord. For our fourth chord, just stay on our new relative minor. So we have these four. Fifth chord, same as first chord. Sixth chord, same as second chord. For our seventh chord, take our new relative minor and go down by the strongest interval. For our eighth chord, just stay on our new major chord. We've got this. You can hear it's a consistent harmonic world with a sense of movement, 8 clear chords, and the same kind of cadencing as the original. This becomes clear if we resort to old terminology and describe the chords in our theme as subdominant, dominant of relative minor, tonic, relative minor, subdominant, dominant of relative minor, subdominant of relative minor, tonic. Now we can name our translation using the same terms, and hopefully we'll hear the structure is the same. Subdominant, dominant of relative minor, tonic, relative minor, subdominant, dominant of relative minor, subdominant of relative minor, tonic. But I'm not necessarily encouraging you to use these old terms. I didn't think of it in that way. As I mentioned, I saw things in mathematical terms, in terms of x and y representing the strongest and second strongest intervals, which is explained further in an essay on my website. Now let's voice this new harmonic progression in a pleasing way. I did this sort of thing, playing from the end of the theme. That's our first translation. Okay, that's the process. It took me a lot of independent thought to arrive at it, but it seems quite simple having described it this way. That's probably because music is already a wonderfully complex language, dealing with a kind of compound notion of time. So a simple musical operation, like filtering and transposing a chord, can appear quite complex without musical shorthand. The remaining translations all follow the same routine. Remember, in other pieces, we can choose any harmony we like. It doesn't have to be a 4-note chord. And because it stems from a rational approach, we don't even have to remain in equal temperament, so long as we follow the formula that governs our chosen progression in relation to the opening chord. Working all this out can mess with your brain a bit. So I wrote a simple computer program to help. This was back in 1985-86. I remember very clearly the moment the computer printed out all the 43 progressions. I'll just quickly say a bit about the overall structure of my composition. Please refer to the diagram on the screen. Because there were going to be 43 translations, it was already going to be quite a long piece. So I decided to only state most of them once. They fly by. I made a structure by placing the 43 translations into 8 groups. That mirrors the 8 chords of the theme. The order of these 43 translations was designed to help the music flow. Certain relationships between them helped. For a start, there were the chords which were inversions of one another, like major and minor. I placed these within the same group. There were others where the inverted version did not change the harmony. Intervals were the same when inverted. You can see that's a major third, a tone, and a major third. So it's the same on the way back down. So you don't get a different chord if you invert it. Then there were static chords, where the progression did not give rise to new notes. Here's a gritty one. One of these was the very familiar and distinctive diminished 7th chord, which I used to mark the midpoint of the piece. For the final ordering, I was careful to consider the way that one harmony might follow another. After so much logical and mathematical thought, it was nice to start applying artistic judgment. The traditional sense of voice leading was useful here. I had the option of either making a smooth change or an abrupt change to mark the end of a group. Finally, to make the structure even clearer, I used the major theme at the beginning, the minor theme after group 2, then I used just the first chord of the major theme after group 4, and just the first chord of the minor theme after group 6. Then I obviously used the whole theme at the end. So these are the chords of the first group. The first one ends like this. Then we go to this, which ends like this. Then we go here, which ends like this. Then we have this one, which ends like this. And then we have this one, which ends like this. So now I'll show you how the theme and the first group sound. So that's how you can translate a simple chord sequence into any type of harmony you want. It allows you to relate simple and complex sounds. It's potentially inclusive of any type of harmony you want, yet it also gives a sense of where the centre of the music is and how far from that we are travelling. What elevates this technique above abstract musical or mathematical theory is that each chord type has its own distinctive mood and level of tension. The music evokes a wide range of emotion and traverses a wide palette of harmonic colour. And you are still free to invest these translations with character and imagination, because you have only defined the chart of new harmonies, like a jazz chart. There is still room for creativity. It's a purely harmonic approach. All we have defined is the shape of the landscape at any given point. How you present life within that landscape is still free. I went for some simple, identifiable characteristics. The arpeggio-like theme and the rising scale. Of course, not all musicians think of music in this way. We're choosing the harmonies and then we're animating them melodically. But often music is written the other way around, choosing melodic shapes and then finding harmonies to go with them, or allowing harmony to arise spontaneously from the combination of different melodies. But all of these approaches are valid, and the knowledge gained from one process informs the others. In terms of the science behind this technique, there are obvious parallels with light, how it's translated into the various colours of the spectrum, the evolution of different life forms, different chemical compounds, different spoken languages, and different personalities. I found it fascinating and have explored these ideas further, but that's for another day. I hope you found that interesting and illuminating. If you enjoyed this presentation, I intend to do more if possible, so please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I've put lots of my music up on YouTube, SoundCloud and Bandcamp. And my website has plenty of detail. For example, there's an essay on the subject I just talked about. I don't always write in this style, but it was certainly something I found very interesting to explore. Now, if you want to listen to the whole piece, translations from the original, there are two versions available. The first is an arrangement for violin and piano, and there is a recording with myself on piano and Emma Smith on violin. It's a recording of the first performance we gave together in the Jacqueline du Pré Concert Hall in Oxford in December 2001. That's what you heard at the beginning of this video. The second version is a kind of orchestration, which I did in 2016. You'll have to forgive the fact that it's only a demo using software instruments. One day I hope to orchestrate this properly and have a real orchestra play it. Here are the links to those versions. Thanks for watching. The idea and technique involved in musical translation, pitch translation, frequency translation, and its basis in harmonic filtering is an original concept invented by Jonathan Parry during the years 1979 to 1985. Please respect this authorship by citing his name when using or talking about the technique.